All right, let's go ahead and take a peek into Reconnaissance. Now within this, we're also going to be taking a look at some other things such as scanning networks. We're going to look at live systems, protocols, and also the enumeration side, all in this section. There's a lot of information to cover, so pay close attention and remember, whatever we're seeing here, most likely you're going to need to remember. So try to remember as much as possible, take as many notes as possible, and kind of take it from there. All right, looking at the step one in the hacking life cycle. Now, if we look at the hacking life cycle, we basically have those 5 phases. I think we mentioned we have the 5 phases of the hacking life cycle. And this is basically starts off with the reconnaissance portion, also known as footprinting. And the whole idea of footprinting is to gather as much information about the target as possible so we can then go into the next phase, which is the scanning enumeration phase. This is basically where we use tools like Nmap and we do a little scan on our network or on the subnet, which would then allow us to see what machines are actually alive. And then from there we can enumerate and try to grab additional information off of those remote machines that we just identified as being alive or on the network. Then we get into the third phase, which is gaining access exploitation scenarios. So this is where we actually get into the systems and we actually try to exploit those systems that we've scanned and that we've enumerated. Then we also maintain access by adding in Trojans and rootkits and so forth, backdoors, and then we cover our tracks with phase 5. So when we look at what information is going to be gathered by the hacker, keep in mind this can be everything from online information sources to local social engineering to remote social engineering. Now we need to figure out things like who owns the systems. We need to find the system owners, who registered for the domain name, things of that nature. We need to also find out what types of systems are used, and we can generally find those out by looking at job advertisements or looking at the Wayback Machine, also known as the archive.org. And then we get into things like how big's the company, figure out if they've actually merged recently with another company that could allow us a possible that we can maybe come in as the merged company employees, things of that nature. All right, we need to figure out how their sites communicate with each other, what type of phone systems they use, PBX systems and such, and whatnot. And then also need to figure out if the IT support is either going to be local or off-site. Right, and then also what's accessible from the internet. So what services, routers, DMZs, things of that nature can we identify while we're online. Now keep in mind when we're doing things like this, especially if we're doing some type of active reconnaissance, meaning that we're actually touching the target's website and things like that, you may want to consider using some type of anonymizer, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit as well. Always a good idea, because you don't want the target knowing your IP address, so you'd mask it by using some type of Tor client, some anonymizer, or some VPN client. So when we look at active versus passive, or passive versus active reconnaissance, passive reconnaissance is going to be known as the process of collecting information about an intended target without direct contact with the target. So this would mean going through websites, search engines, things of that nature. Right? So active reconnaissance, however, is the process of collecting information about an intended target by making contact with the target through social engineering or electronic probing of the target system. So this would be showing up at the target, making phone calls at the target, things of that nature. So again here, footprinting defined. Footprinting, again, it's just the process of gathering data regarding a specific network environment, usually for the purpose of exploiting system vulnerabilities. Footprinting also begins by determining the location and objective of an intrusion. Then finally creating a network diagram and or company blueprint for later attack analysis. You can also check as a reference the searchsecurity.techtarget.com/sdefinition/0, SID14_GCI 546674,00.html. Okay. Now let's take a peek at social engineering and how we can also incorporate some of that. Now when it comes to the basics of social engineering, you should be able to answer any question that has to do with any type of social engineering type of question that comes up. Again, the the social engineering scenario is basically the practice of persuading people to believe you are someone you're not, to obtain confidential information by manipulation of legitimate users. Social engineers may use the telephone or the internet to trick people into revealing sensitive information or getting them to do something that is against typical policies. So keep in mind, in layman's terms, that social engineering is generally going to be the act of getting some needed information from a person rather than breaking into a system. Right? So you're not going to do it via digital means, or you're just going to be doing it via human means. So we're going to attack the human factor here. Hacker can obtain information about the target from the internet, newspapers, employees, employee family members, consultants, vendors, customers, and security experts. The method for obtaining information, again, this might be good to know, shoulder surfing, Wayback Machine, as in the archive.org, public websites, Yahoo people, and using various tools like Sam Spade or NeoTrace, for example. Just some social networking sites that you may have heard of before, MySpace, Facebook, LinkedIn, and so forth. Hackers generally will use social networking sites to try and find info enabling them to social engineer your target employees. Many of the people's accounts provide personal photos, very up-to-date details about their private lives, experiences, and behavior habits. Example here would be messages and photos about an upcoming vacation that can cue hackers into when physical access attempts should be made on the victim's home or even the office. Here are some people search engines you can check out. We have zoominfo.com. We have zabasearch.com. We have spock.com. We also have Wink. And you can also list more specialized people search engines by looking at the search-engine-index.co.uk/people_search. All right, and here it is, the Wayback Machine. Now, anytime you come across a scenario where you need to go back in time to figure out perhaps a web page that stated something about jobs, careers, and so forth, that may give us an inkling of information of what machines, what kind of infrastructure they have and so forth on the network, then you would go to the Wayback Machine, also known as the archive.org. Now, Google also has an option that you can look at Google cached pages. However, they're very limited. Anytime we want to go back a month or more, or even years, because it goes all the way back to 1996, you can check out the Wayback Machine, which is basically the archive.org website. It's a pretty nifty little product that is freely available online for you to use. And again, anytime you're looking for something that's a little dated back, you can use the archive.org. As I mentioned before, you can use also when you're targeting the website, doing your active reconnaissance, you may want to use something like Tor. And this is basically a network of virtual tunnels that allows people in groups to improve their privacy and security on the internet. It also enables software developers to create new communication tools with built-in privacy features. Here, a branch of the U.S. Navy uses Tor for open source intelligence gathering, and one of its teams used Tor while deployed in the Middle East recently. Now, law enforcement used Tor for visiting, surveilling websites without leaving government IP addresses in their web logs, and for security during sting operations and so forth. You can check them out at the torproject.org. And keep in mind, when you're using things like this, anonymizers and proxies are definitely going to be used, because they will go out and protect your privacy and identity when you're on the internet. It also allows you to possibly post negative entries in message boards, blogs, or whatnot without, again, leaving your IP address. And for some companies, too, even though you may have a policy in place that prevents people from going to certain websites, you can also use this to even bypass applications that are blocking you or preventing you access to certain websites that you would normally visit and so forth. So you can definitely use that. A good example would be your Internet Explorer settings. You can actually change that around, add in your specific proxy server that you want to use. And again, with that, even if group policies are enabled on the network, you can still bypass those policies, security policies, by just putting in your own proxy and so forth. You can do a quick Google search on free web proxies out there, and you'll be surprised of how many results you'll get where you can actually use an IP address of another server that's out there. So whenever you're browsing the internet, you're going then through that other server to gain access to websites and so forth. Again, that may be restricted within the company policy that you have within the organization. So when we look at some of the footprinting tools and so forth, what we're going to be looking into, we're going to be looking at things like, obviously your search engines using Google and so forth. Looking at some backtrack Kali scripts possibly, but doing information gathering there. Using things like Dig, which is basically the NS lookup tool within Unix. We also have the Whois side, which we'll look into more so. This is specifically to DNS. And obviously here we have NS lookup, which is the counterpart of Dig. And then we have NS lookup, which is the counterpart of Dig, and it allows us to do zone transfers even, and so forth, right? And then we also have Edgar, traceroute, and so forth that we'll look into. Again, we're going to check out some of these and take it from there. All right, so let's take a peek at some of the Google type of things we can do here, and I'd highly recommend that you try some of these out to make sure you see the results of the queries, so that way you have an inkling of an idea of what type of results will be used if you're trying to find certain types of information. So with some of the Google queries that we can use, there are some that are going to be very useful. Now whenever you're using Google and you're using different search operators, you can use the things like the site colon, which basically restricts the results to those web pages in a given domain.